Welcome everyone to our webinar. Today we'll be talking to Lars Olsen and Mark Higgason. Lars is the Midwest Director of WiredScore and Mark is with Encompass AV. The topic of conversation today is going to be around WiredScore and how it applies to the construction industry and to buildings in general. The costs related to a build out that became technologically obsolete are enormous, with significant disruption risks associated with all moves, adds and changes needed in today's building, IT, and cabling systems. The resources, expertise, design decisions needed early on are crucial to ensuring your development and redevelopment is always ahead of the IT curve. Today we'll be talking to Lars, like I mentioned. Now let Lars take it from here and introduce himself.
Yes, hi, thank you. As you said, I'm with WiredScore and heads up our Midwest division. And really, in a nutshell, what WiredScore is we provide a certification for buildings based on their connectivity and in-building technology. So if you're familiar with other industry certification levels like LEED or WELL, it works in a similar fashion that we will give a building or a development a score based off various criteria that has to do with connectivity and in-building technology, and then you can obtain a platinum, silver, gold level of certification that's helpful in both marketing, but also there's a lot more to it where we can provide a lot of valuable insight when it comes to the planning and design of buildings to make sure that you're not building a building that becomes obsolete, as Anatoly was alluding to, because technology is changing fast.
Thank you, Lars. Mark?
My name is Mark Higgason. I am a registered communication distribution designer. I've been with Encompass since 1999, and I'm really happy that you guys are speaking with us today. This is a very interesting subject. We discovered WiredScore in 2017 and just thought it was a fantastic idea. It was a way for a common language to be spoken between real estate managers, the telecom industry, and tenants, because there's a lot of tech going on in today's modern office, and a lot of times people just didn't really understand what they were getting into, and that led to a lot of difficulties.
I completely agree. And you know, on that point, Lars, so we've all heard of smart buildings as they apply to residential, to a degree commercial. It's a term, but nobody really understands what it is at the end of the day. And there's no standardized process of what defines a smart building. Is it something that's got a smart connected thermostat, or is there more to it? So I wanted to see if you could, you touched on what WiredScore is, but I wanted to see if you could kind of give a little bit more background on what goes into it and what are the certification levels.
Right, absolutely. So what we do right now is that we're offering certifications primarily for office buildings, and those are Wired certified, silver, gold, platinum, based on the different criteria that includes everything from diverse points of entry and telecom room, planning, security, risers, and all these things. When it comes to smart buildings, we don't yet offer a certification for smart buildings because, as you just said, it is really hard to know what makes a building smart. And we see a lot of building owners and designers, they're proclaiming that they have a smart building, but no one really knows what that actually entails. So we've actually recently announced that we've put together a smart building council where we've gathered all the gathered executives from all the biggest real estate developers and owners and industry experts to sit on a global panel where together we're going to figure out what exactly are the criteria that should be in place for a building to be called smart. So yeah, stay tuned. There will certainly be a smart building certification coming soon.
And Mark, you've been at the forefront for 20 years of this. How have you seen this evolve? How have you seen the evolution of what goes into a building and what developers are looking for, and more importantly, what the end users and tenants are looking for kind of evolve over time?
Well, I think just internet connectivity and its importance has really changed the most over my career span, to the point now where it is simply the most important function of an office. If an office loses internet connectivity, the day's done. It's the same as losing power, essentially. What work can be done without network connectivity at this point? Now, there was never really a focus for any of all of these systems, networking, any kind of smart building systems that were there previously, any kind of surveillance systems or access control. These were all separate systems. They didn't speak to each other. They were on their own cabling networks. They were installed by separate contractors. That's really beginning to change now. So instead of having 10 to 15 different networks in a building, we're trying to move more towards a converged network that we can have all of these services live on. It's easier to manage, it's easier to plan for, and it's easier to upgrade into the future. So we're really seeing a more unified communication system as opposed to many, many separate systems as we did originally when I got involved with that. But over here at our office, we're doing our best to define what a smart building is. And anyone in the Chicagoland area, we'd like to invite out here to show some of these advanced systems that we have, and they can help define what a smart building is, for themselves.
Actually, I have a really personal experience with multiple networks. That was in my past role as director of innovation for a real estate investment firm. One of my responsibilities was to identify technologies that we could use to add value to assets or improve operational effectiveness when we were redeveloping them. So I thought, okay, great, I'm going to have a managed network for the ISP to tenant, and that's going to be great. They're going to own that relationship. And then we'll have a managed network that's going to take care of all the automation for the building and for the, on a tenant level. And managing two networks like that was expensive, it turned out to be, and very complicated. And ultimately, a lot of buildings that I was looking at just didn't have the foundational digital infrastructure to layer all these new technologies on top of. So if you're talking about access controls or security or building management systems or all of these things, like for a building to be able to adapt and use technology like that, it is absolutely critical that the foundational infrastructure, digital infrastructure, is there, and that is fiber and conduits and all of these things that are expensive to put in after the cement is poured. So planning is very important.
Absolutely.
And I've read recently. Sorry, go ahead, Mark.
Sorry. This would be a WiredScore issue too, because if you had a legacy building with multiple networks in it, it very well could stop you from installing new technology. And this cable must be removed. A lot of times it's still in these buildings and it's clogging your risers and really putting a stop on the potential of what an office space could be.
Yeah, we have seen when we do building audits and walk buildings and inspect risers, conduits, and all of these things, it's incredible the things that you see. As you said, risers can get clogged because when a tenant move out, sometimes they just cut the fiber, leave it in the risers, it gets full. First of all, it's a fire hazard, and then you have to pull new wiring and cables elsewhere, which is not up to building code and isn't very secure if you have exposed fiber that anyone can tap into, so to speak. So,
oh yeah, we haven't even began to touch the physical security of your network.
Right. No. Cybersecurity is also very much a physical thing, as we see, and we've seen often telecom equipment mounted on plywood in a parking garage for anyone to walk up to or a car to back into. And these are buildings that have tenants that could be everything from hedge funds to the Department of Defense. It's all exposed, so it is worrisome.
Yeah, and hacking's a very interesting subject because most people just imagine someone behind a laptop somewhere for some reason with a hoodie on. But it's much more than that. It's people on the telephone claiming access issues. It's physical issues. People putting physical devices on the network. It's a multi-pronged world, and there's actually a lot to know and fear about it. And unfortunately, it's not going to get any better anytime soon. So we have to prepare for it.
And in preparing for it, what should developers be doing right now to deliver against their tenants' increasingly complex internet and mobile connectivity needs and security needs? What should they be on the lookout for and making sure they're doing right now?
Yeah, we really try to be there as someone that can look at the plans and draw from the experience that we have from working with developers across the globe and across the country, across the region, and share best practices that we've seen, because there could be a lot of developers, they like to keep their cards pretty close to their chest, especially if they're being innovative. They want to be first. There's always this amenities race and things like that. But I think we're all better off, and the tenants are better off, and the industry in general, if we share best practices and expertise. So we try to tap into that, those things that we see every day, and try and help other developers avoid expensive pitfalls where, I mean, I could talk examples all day, but we've seen developers that thought they were building what was going to be a platinum certified building. And then we look at the plans and we see that, oh, they only have a single point of entry for ISPs, for instance, but they have everything else. They have the risers, they have 2 telecom rooms that are locked off and secure. So it's just important that someone, a third party, looks at it and just gives another set of eyes to make sure nothing was overlooked.
And early on too.
Yeah, I typically say that if you want to work with us, towards end of schematic design process is really the ideal time to get involved, because you're still doing bids and you haven't finalized any construction drawings or anything like that. So that's the cheapest time to make changes if you need to.
Yeah, we like catching mistakes on paper. It's much easier all around.
Exactly.
And what, Mark, what are you seeing right now? We have new buildings and we have existing buildings. Existing buildings you mentioned are the ones with a lot of the problems, a lot of the cut cables and so forth. What have you seen building owners doing, and Lars, you too, especially as it relates to your past experience of Director of Innovation, to improve these buildings, to change them? Are you seeing this primarily applied to, as far as WiredScore, to new construction, or are you seeing retrofits right now also being cognizant of the changes and preparing for the future?
Yeah, we do see both fields really kind of getting a mindset now of what needs to be right. Without standards, we're in the Wild West. And that's really where, our eyes perked up when we first started hearing about WiredScore. I've done an awful lot of study on telecommunications, how large, risers need to be, all the odds and ends, but that doesn't necessarily translate into a built standard. So,
right, and it's something that's ever evolving, right? We constantly, as I'm sure other certifications have to maintain their integrity. You constantly have to update the criteria as technology changes and demand is changing. And a good example of that is that our scorecard didn't in the past typically give points for fixed wireless, but fixed wireless has become in most markets really robust and a really efficient solution to provide redundancy. So now you actually do get points for that, because you can have as much as, you can get gig speed internet on stable on fixed wireless. So that's an example of technology evolving and the likes of us adapting to it.
And we're doing our best to throw more at you too. One of the most exciting things that we have back here in our warehouse, one of the network technologies that we like to showcase is PoE lighting. So PoE not as in point of entry, like everyone at WiredScore would think, but powered over the Ethernet. So we're actually using network cabling and power from the switches to power the lighting that's above me right now. I have 3 separate systems here, but this is all going to live on the building's network also. So we're looking at significantly more cabling per floor.
Right.
Security cameras used to be on their own proprietary cable, on a radio grade cable, also part of the network now. Many of my audio systems are networked audio systems where previously they ran on analog cables in an analog world, and now they're on the network also. So I would imagine much more is coming out. And actually, one of my favorite boring technologies here is our PoE clock. It's an analog dial clock, but it's actually powered and timed from the network. So boring everyday tech, but it's actually really interesting to me.
To expand on that, so the data cables, they used to connect pretty much to the computer. You want internet on a workstation, that's where you do the data cable. Everything else was separate. Right now, with WiredScore, with the new technologies, beyond PoE lights, what other kind of systems and technologies are you seeing running on these converged networks?
Well, really anything. If you look at most electronics, they run on DC power, and AC power is used to distribute it. It's by far the most efficient means of distributing power, but the devices themselves use DC power. PoE is DC power. So as long as it's not, let's say, a giant coffee machine or a washer dryer, we probably have sufficient power to power most anything. I have a PoE powered computer. It's a desktop Windows 10 all-in-one monitor, and it's powered simply by one Cat6 line.
Wow.
I had no idea.
Yeah, that would be that's going to be a game changer for access controls, and especially when you remodel or redo buildings where you don't want to necessarily rip up walls and tear down everything. You can maybe get away then with the existing infrastructure that's in place there.
I'm given a certain amount of voltage now, and the government has met of our enthusiasm by slowly giving us more and more power to work with over a Cat6 cable. So we're up to 100 watts right now. Currently, I don't do anything more than 60 watts here, but it's plenty of room. Even in my back room where I have what's called a high bay ceiling, it's about 15 feet up. I have a PoE light that performs better than the standard lighting at significantly less energy use. But this is lighting. You've got to come and see this. This isn't something you could just take my word for, over a video conference. So that's why we have them set up here. We love technology, but we've seen it sink people. So we use our space as a laboratory. We like to really vet our technologies here and make sure this is something we want to get into. Lighting in particular, we had to live under this for a while before it was something we were going to recommend for our customers. We like to do that with every technology. I have some very interesting surveillance technologies here that I would like to show people in person, but these are all network technologies now. I could tell you a quick example of where low voltage technology really came out ahead of high voltage. We had a client that had a parking garage that was built in the 1980s, and it would be really difficult to add power infrastructure to it, but they wanted to upgrade the surveillance system. Ends up that the fiber line that we thought we could tap into was a tenant's fiber line, so we couldn't touch it. And the actual conduit had been destroyed several years earlier. We had a single RG59, which is a coax TV cable that was surviving. So we were actually able to use that to provide internet. But I was able to use low voltage technologies to power all of my cameras using step down voltage. So we started out with a very high voltage, and then we stepped it down to make a difference. And we were able to wire up the entire parking garage, saving the client $25,000 in electrical work.
That's really cool.
I just want to touch on something that Mark was saying about wiring and more wiring. And I think it's a general misconception that people think that we're moving towards, 5G and everything wireless, and that ultimately means less wiring and less need for space in buildings for telecom equipment, cellular. But in reality, it actually ends up being more, and without getting too into it, but 5G travels at a much higher frequency than 4G, and when everyone is going to expect their 5G phones to work at the office or in their homes, and they have all installed low energy glass that this high frequency won't be able to get through. No one's going to actually be able to utilize 5G unless you have some internal system like a distributed antenna system in the building. So ultimately, yeah, the faster internet becomes and the more devices that we connect to the network wirelessly, we actually need more wires on the back end to run all of this.
Yeah, it's true. It's really only wireless for the end user. If you pop your head above the ceilings, there is significantly more cable. And actually, you brought up really the best point, which is 5G and how it's going to affect people and how it's going to affect buildings. And a lot of these buildings already have DAS or distributed antenna systems, for several reasons, but they're not going to be adequate for 5G. This is going to require a redesign, remapping of floors. So we're going to have to do this all over again.
I'm glad you touched on wireless. I think the instant question with wireless is security. What have you seen kind of what has been the conversation around the more wireless technology, the more wireless devices, the closer we get to 5G being kind of a mainstay? What are the security kind of risks, and what is involved in a WiredScore in general to account for that?
So when it comes to, for instance, one of the things that we look at and score on and give points on is common area Wi-Fi. So if you provide Wi-Fi to your buildings, which really it's become something that tenants expect. And again, it just shows that tenants in both multifamily, commercial assets, the lines between hospitality and multifamily and office has been blurred, and tenants are expecting a wholesome experience from their host or their landlord. So wireless is of course a very important part of that, because they're going to expect that all their devices are going to work wirelessly.
And something interesting to bring up, wireless isn't available to everyone. So if you'll notice in a hotel, you're still going to have Ethernet jacks everywhere. And there's a reason for that. And that's because Wi-Fi is just radio. So you're broadcasting, and it may be encrypted, but you are broadcasting everything that you do out. So anyone really can access that. So government employees aren't allowed to do their work on Wi-Fi. So that's just one of the reasons you're always going to see some sort of wired connection, and they still don't suffer the same issues. Wi-Fi will occasionally have a dropout.
Right.
That makes sense. And Lars, to kind of go full circle back on where you started, just career-wise, that you were in innovation on the real estate development side before going to WiredScore. And I think, and I'm sure the reason that the company had that role was to improve the marketability of the buildings, whether it's marketability to tenants or the general value of the buildings. What are you seeing right now as far as WiredScore playing into that marketability? How is it being communicated? How is it being received? And just general.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, ultimately, that's why WiredScore was started and founded. Initially, it was driven by that the real estate industry was getting a lot of questions from the tenant base around connectivity and in-building technology that that the leasing brokers and the developers weren't really able to answer, and they didn't really have a language for how to talk about these things. So that's how our founder came up with WiredScore, the company, and Wired Certification, the product, as a way for all the different stakeholders to have a common language around connectivity and in-building technology, Because we often see that a leasing deal can be slowed down by the prospective tenant asking technical questions that, first of all, the leasing broker can answer, and then the developer can answer, so they have to go back to their engineers, and by the time they get an answer, they might have moved on to a different building where they got those answers right up front. And one way that we help answer those questions right away, or help leasing teams answer those questions, is that we provide a fact sheet that has all the technical attributes of the building highlighted in plain English, and we'll answer 9, if not 10 out of 10 questions that a CTO will have. And we see technical teams being more and more involved in the office selection process, just because no business can operate without internet connection these days. All their critical buildings software is obviously running off the cloud. And I mean, I think it was Satya Nadella, the Microsoft CEO, said on a recent earnings call that they had seen 2 years worth of digital transformation in 2 months after COVID happened. So all these companies that have held off migrating to the cloud were forced to now. So again, stable internet connection, good internet connection, and redundancy measures is just getting more and more important. But you also need to be able to talk about it in a way that people understand, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, you had 3 very distinct groups here. Your stakeholders in it, your tenants, the telecom industry that built this stuff, and then the IT department, which none of these paths really cross. So they really needed a common language, because usually the client would never have access to the telecom engineers that built this. So well done.
Makes sense. As we kind of wrap up, I wanted to open it up for a little Q&A. We have a couple of questions here that I wanted to ask. So the first one that came up is, Lars, you mentioned at the beginning of the call that there are multiple levels of WiredScore. I think you mentioned, silver, gold, and platinum. Very high level, kind of what is the differentiation between them, and what kind of buildings are you seeing lean towards the different certification levels?
Yeah, I'd say that if you think of a platinum building, it's the kind of building that is trying to attract the Facebooks, the Googles, the Amazon, big e-commerce platforms, stuff like that. And those, we see more and more of those types of tenants demanding, they won't even, it's a good way for them to filter down options when they look at buildings and say, okay, if it's platinum certified, they know that all the basic needs that they have are taken care of. That said, a gold building is a really good building from a technology perspective. And we have gold buildings that have hedge funds, trading platforms, and they're more than robust enough. Same with silver, which is also has a good technology infrastructure, but the main difference between gold and a silver, for instance, is that a silver building typically needs some type of further investment in the future to maintain that level and not become obsolete from a technology perspective.
Got it, makes sense. Next question is, again, going back to COVID, that we've seen a lot of technology evolution over the last few months. And one of the evolutions that we've seen is that people are working from home, and residential connectivity is just as important as commercial. So just wanted to see where WiredScore is on looking broader and looking a little bit beyond commercial into residential and other types of properties. You also mentioned hospitality.
Yeah, I got to be careful not promising too much here, but we do have a wired or a certification program called Wired Certification Home in the UK and Ireland. That's been running for a little over a year now, and we've gotten great feedback from it. And honestly, whenever we talk to developers and building owners here in the US that do own or develop different types of assets, including multifamily, the first thing they ask is, so can you certify our multifamily assets too? And yes, it's something that we're working on. It's not copy paste. We can't use the same criteria and have the same scorecard between different countries, because building codes are different. And it's not like a software where you can build it and change it as you go. You got to get it right the first time.
That's kind of funny. All of the technologies that we talk about in the office now, the next question is usually, can I have them in my residence? And we're not really even thinking about that yet, but the office and the home are going to look more similar in the future, no matter what.
Absolutely.
This is a question about PoE lighting. If the network goes down, do the lights go out? That's a great question. Absolutely not. That was an original thought, and the lighting will remain if there's an internet outage. Absolutely. It's a local network control. There's typically a server, so network outages wouldn't affect your lighting at all.
So how do you connect emergency lighting on PoE systems?
There's a couple different ways. Some people would choose just to use standard AC power for the emergency. Otherwise, there's battery backups that are in line with the emergency lighting, so that if we do lose the PoE lighting, that these batteries would be on. That's a huge concern with lighting, because there is an awful lot of safety aspect to it.
And then a second question also on PoE lighting. How does it help with lower overall energy consumption in a building?
Well, that's really like a multi-pronged answer, because it several different aspects. The efficiency of the architecture of the switch itself, but most importantly, the sensor network and the intelligence behind it. So not using as much, using the power that you need, producing the light that you need instead of just 100% at all times. One of the techniques for this is called daylight harvesting, where we actually have sensors in the ceiling that are looking for just normal ambient light in the room, and it adjusts the output of the light to kind of match whatever your setting is. Now, it's very difficult to measure each one of these lights with DC power. So what we've done here to kind of prove energy savings is we have a monitor on the panel. So we can monitor overall power usage in real time while I flick the light switches, and we could actually see the needles jump around. I could plug a vacuum cleaner in the wall, and then the needle jumps up. But yeah, the point is, it's the simplest seeing is believing test that I could do for people. And once again, I really encourage people to come out and visit us in Elk Grove.
And one of the things that, just from personal experience, what I see with PoE lighting, besides on and off, there's also just usability. By it being connected to the network, it takes into account a lot of other things. It takes into account how many people are in the room, which parts of the building are being occupied, and it turns on and off lights in accordance with what's actually needed at the time. And I think that could also lead to some cost savings, opposed to just having it on across the board.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I'm really spoiled too. When I walk into the office now, I don't hit a light switch. The lights just kind of slowly ramp on in a theatrical kind of presentation. At first, I was very concerned with the physical light switches. I didn't like some of the offerings out there, but in practice, they're not used. And to kind of tack on to what you were saying before, these are networked lights, so it's also the basis of a sensor network now. So I could tack any kind of sensor load I wanted to onto the lighting system. So we could take temperature, we could check for air quality, like you said, occupational sensors.
How do you size the telecom room when you utilize PoE for all the systems, considering the importance of real estate?
Well, there's two schools of thought with PoE. You would normally think that this is in a TR, telecom room, but not necessarily. The switches involved, the Cisco Digital Building Switch Series is a switch designed to live in the plenum. So if we looked at a spot like a hotel, you could actually have one switch per room, if that made sense to you. So they could be distributed. They wouldn't have to necessarily be in a central telecommunication room where you would be limited by distance and a few other things. So these are actually built, fanless and to survive a dusty condition up in the plenum.
Lars, how about on your end? Like, what are you seeing as far as the size of the rooms right now? Are they big or smaller? Can technologies be utilized to kind of save that real estate?
Yeah, I think a lot of developers that we see, they want to value engineer those rooms away because they can get a parking spot or an office or a bathroom or something out of that they can measure a return on more easily in the form of rent. But you're just gonna first of all, you don't know what's coming down the line, so setting aside some space will always be beneficial. And yeah, as I would say, as much as you can afford to allocate to technology or telecom equipment or in general, yeah, definitely.
Yeah, absolutely. Best practices dictates that you should expect a 20% growth and build for that anyway. So maybe in the future that'll nudge a few percentage points higher.
Got it. And I have one more question.
Sure.
Can the data from the sensors be shared with other systems in the building?
So this is the most exciting part of the future to me. I'm currently using the chef analogy, where if you look at technologies as ingredients, they're great on their own, you know. But what a chef does is he takes these ingredients and he mixes them together and he produces a totally new result. So we have all these network systems producing data on a shared network, but they're not necessarily communicating with each other just yet. But they are written open source, so they absolutely can. So now we live in a world where my security cameras or my lighting can tell my security camera something. A security camera can link with access control. Access control can link with the temperature, with the HVAC system. Just knowing that there's no one here, why would it be on? So all of these technologies, we're at the very beginning of them being integrated in ways that we can't even think about right now.
All the more reason to have the right network and be connected to be able to have these systems talk to each other.
Yeah, none of this is going to happen without a proper network. If we're having these kind of interconnection problems, you know, it's not going to run smooth. Which ultimately, if the technology doesn't run smooth, it's either going to get left to the wayside or replaced by something better.
That's all for the audience questions. I have one final question for Lars. These last 4 or 5 months have seen a huge shakeup in general. Just wanted to see what is WiredScore doing to account for what we've learned over the last 5 months, and kind of what are the forward-looking plans beyond what is currently in place. Not necessarily looking into other building types, but even within the same building types, are there changes that have been made as a result of what we've learned?
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, we talked to building owners that have existing buildings now that, you know, the buildings are empty and most of them are taking the opportunity to upgrade systems that are hard to upgrade when you have thousands, in some cases, thousands of employees there and tenants there every day. So now they're upgrading infrastructure, but also everything from elevators and access control. And ultimately, the most forward-thinking landlords and developers now are taking this opportunity and installing touchless everything and putting in sensors, crowd control, and sensors that can measure how much a room is being utilized and all of these things. And again, as you put more sensors in and IoT devices, it's becoming, of course, then increasingly important with a solid backbone that all of this technology can live on top of. So that's really what we see a lot of now, is that technology has really become top priority for a lot of landlords and developers. And for the ones that aren't prioritizing it, I'm afraid that, that will have lasting impact on the value of their asset for sure.
You know, and to that point right now, you mentioned that the buildings right now are upgrading and most of the tenants are out of the office working from home. Mm-hmm. When they return, what should be kind of how should they look at separating between the buildings networks and the tenant networks?
Yeah, good question. That may be a question that's better asked of some of our engineers and people like Mark and that are into the weeds on the actual technology aspect. Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of clients would not necessarily even trust the same telecommunications rooms to be shared. They like these rooms locked off completely. So then you really get into the realm of physical security. So having sensors and surveillance in your telecommunications room, the actual front panels, there's sensors available to see if, anyone's actually physically gone into something. So it really depends on your industry, I imagine, but we have come across clients where we're not even allowed to run cabling near their telecommunication room.
Okay. Got it.
Typically not the case, though.
Got it. I think that's it for our questions. I wanted to thank both of you for being present, for sharing your expertise, and I think this was fantastic.
Yes, thanks for having me. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, thank you both. This was a great conversation, and I hope you both can come out here and in real life at some point.
Yeah.
And we just barely touched on some of the things that we can offer on. So.
And what we'll do is when we're done with this, we're going to have the recorded version that's going to be up on the Encompass AV site, as well as going to be shared through Wired. In the description, we're going to include some additional supporting information. Lars has mentioned that there's some certification specs and so forth that he'll be sharing. We have, I think, a demo video of PoE lights we'll probably include in there. So we'll have additional links in there to provide just a little bit more background for everyone to see. So thank you everyone who participated and who watched and who's going to be watching the recorded version going forward.